Today at Blue Ridge Overland Gear, we're going to talk about starting a fire. If you're in the woods enough, you'll have to start a fire either in the rain or right after the rain. It's been raining for 3 or 4 days here on and off, so this is a great example of an environment where you're not going to find a lot of dry wood. So you could always use this, and of course we're big fans of these, but if you want to impress your friends or be ready for when this and these run out, you have some options. So one part of successful fire starting is knowing your natural resources. Here in the Southeast, we have a lot of red cedar. This piece obviously has been split, that kind of shows you the color. And we have a lot of pines. These pines provide pitchwood, fatwood, whatever you want to call it, but essentially it's pine soaked in resin. You can usually find it where branches have broken off of the main trunk, or even in stumps that the tree's been dead for years. Both of these are great options for fire starting, especially when the environment may not be conducive to making that easy. Up in the Northeast, you can't beat birch. And then of course in the Southwest, everything catches on fire very easily. So be very cautious anytime you start a fire. So one of your first steps is to find some good fuel. We'll talk about sizing in a moment, but let's talk about in an environment where a lot of things are wet, what you need to look for. This deadfall is a great example. You can see this tree has got wedged when it came down. So the majority of it's nowhere near the ground. You can come in and kind of use the snap test. And I know it sounds silly, but that's going to be really dry. This stuff is perfect for kind of those first few minutes of the fire, breaking it up into easy to manage pieces. And you can collect a bunch of this as you go and just kind of walk around a bit. So one thing to look out for is just because it's up off the ground doesn't mean that it's good fuel. Maybe it's been there a long time, it's started to rot. Maybe it's a species that doesn't dry out very easily or retains moisture. For example, I don't know the particulars, but as you can tell, this doesn't want to break. I honestly think this one's been here long enough that it's just kind of spongy. So this would probably create a lot of smoke, but not a lot of heat. So we mentioned the red cedar being a great source of fuel in the Southeast, and here's a perfect example. This tree is still alive, but what they do is they kill off the bottom branches to put more energy to the top of the tree. And as you can tell, these are super dry and just here for the taking. If you don't know what red cedar or even the white cedar is, this is a really good example. The inner wood has like a red, almost purplish color, and the bark usually comes off in this kind of dry strips. You can actually use this to take a spark if you want to, but we're going to take a different route today. Don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure this mushroom, this fungi here, is called the sickener as a common name. It is known for a spicy flavor and causing severe gastrointestinal distress for 7 to 8 hours after you eat it. Which brings up a lot of questions about the first guy that noted the spicy flavor. So if you want your fire to last for a while and you don't want to constantly feed it the small stuff, this is a great spot to look for something a little more substantial. Now, these would probably break off with a little bit of muscle, but a folding pocket saw is a great way to be able to harvest wood, and it doesn't take up much room at all. As we were saying, it's rained a lot here. The ground is really wet. One consideration that may not be 100% necessary, but really helps, is to build a base for your fire. Something that helps oxygen get underneath it. You don't have to use your firewood necessarily. Decently dry wood helps. But this is gonna make life a little bit easier for you, and you won't have to worry about the moisture in the ground robbing the heat from your fire when it first gets started. Maybe you brought firewood, but it probably looks like this. And especially in a wet environment, that is really difficult to get started. So I suggest going for these pieces, let's call it pencil lead size, middle finger to thumb thickness. Then moving up to pencil, let's say both middle fingers touching and both thumbs touching. That's kind of a good start. Better safe than sorry. Maybe gather twice as much as you think you'll need. You can always throw it on the fire. And then for a decent, fire over the course of a night, you want to bundle about like this, moving up to that next size. All right, so let's say all of this is soaking wet and you need to get some sort of dry wood to get this fire going to burn off that moisture. So we're going to talk about batoning. We cut these earlier with a saw, and now we're going to use a small belt knife like this SE3. This is my truck knife, stays in the console almost all the time, to get to the dry wood that's in the middle of these dead branches. They were on the tree, but obviously if this was like a thunderstorm or it had rained for a whole weekend, everything on the outside is going to be pretty soaked. A couple of points for batoning. One, do it at your own risk. Not all knives are created equally. SE comes with a pretty much no questions asked lifetime warranty. but to supersede that, I've never had one give me any issues. And two, make sure that you're batoning on a soft surface. I've got an old dead log right there. You can really damage an edge really quickly if you're not careful. So we're gonna start with this one, and these are not perfectly straight grain pieces of wood. So this probably won't be really pretty, but that's okay. So as you can see, now we're exposing the center wood here, nice and dry. We'll go down one more size. That knot caused it not to be, pun not intended, not a perfect split. Now, if it was really wet, we would have dry wood. Obviously, if it was still raining, you might want to have something to protect this, but it's better than nothing. A little tip, if you're curious if this wood is actually dry, it's about 80 degrees and 900% humidity now, so it doesn't apply. But in a cold environment, wet wood will feel cold, but all wood will feel cold. You can check to see if there's any moisture in it by placing it against your lips. And after a few seconds, dry wood will feel warm and wet wood will continue to feel cold. So that's a little tip for anybody that might be in northern environments. So we were talking about knowing your environment. Here in Virginia, we have a ton of poplar trees, tulip poplars to be exact. And when you find a down poplar, oftentimes you can peel the bark off in these big sheets, see? And especially when it's kind of like in this stringy, almost looks like natural fibers, you can break it down really easy just by rubbing it between your hands, pulling it apart. And that is an absolutely fantastic fire starter. It will take a flick from a lighter or even a spark from a ferro rod really easily. And yeah, that was one we just found like literally right over there, ready to go. One thing to do if you can't find any dry tinder is just look for some wood, like we batoned earlier, that is dry, and make some fine shavings out of it. This takes a little time, takes a sharp knife, and honestly a little bit of practice, but it's well worth the effort to avoid frustration later. So at this point, we've got a bunch of shavings, some of that poplar bark, we've got a platform to keep it up off the damp ground, we've got pencil lead, pencil, some of the stuff we batoned down and then broke down even further, and then a few larger pieces. So I feel pretty confident that with that right there, you can start a fire and have it going. But if you want to go a little more difficult, or maybe you don't have a lighter, a great thing to have in any of your survival kits or gear, it's a ferro rod. Ferro rod, ferrocerium, a bunch of different makers. Make sure you get a quality one, but essentially you apply the 90-degree or similar edge to steel, and sparks come off of it. The idea being you put those sparks into your tinder, your curls, whatever, and that gets your fire going. So one thing I'm doing is leaving the side that's getting the most burn exposed to the oxygen. We can talk about fire lays in another video, but sometimes just getting something going is your main goal, and then you can focus on building out your fire for warmth or cooking or whatever purpose you might have for it. Usually a pretty good sign is once you have a knee-high flame like this one. You can kind of slow down, start being a little more strategic. So I'm actually going to switch us over to kind of a modified log cabin fire lay. Now you've got a good bed of coals going, kind of the log cabin structure, and this would be the point where I would start putting things like this on it once it burns down a little bit more. Hopefully the next time you're out and you don't want to use your last road flare to get your fire going, you've got some skills now that will help you be successful in that task. And I hope it's also not 90 degrees with 88% humidity when you're doing it. And if you'd like to see more skills-based videos, let us know in the comments below. Me swatting at this random black bug that really is trying to lay eggs in my ears. I'm not a bushcrafter. I just like to set things on fire. Hey, there's another spider. Somebody's calling. Hey, this is Rick at Blue Ridge Overland Gear.